Hey everybody, you're watching Liberty Online, and as you can see, we are here now back in the Carnegie, and we will be here for 2 more weeks and breaking for Christmas. Now let's check out week 1 of Phil's new message, Radical. Let's check it out.
Going into a 3-week message called Radical, if you didn't notice by the intro music there. So we're going to be talking about Radical. Thanks for coming out this morning, those guys who actually defrosted the cars and got here this morning. And welcome to you guys at home. If you're in your cozy, warm bed watching this from home online, we just welcome you. Thank you for joining us. I think it'll be on a Thursday that's going out on YouTube or Facebook. And so we're going to be doing this Radical message. And I am talking to everyone in the room, but I am talking to you at home as well, up until Christmas for the next 3 weeks, about Radical. And I'm going to kind of follow on from the Playing It Safe message. So if you haven't watched that, go back and watch that as well. But I want to follow on from the Playing It Safe message, because if I'm really honest, this is actually the message that I wanted to preach a month ago. And so a month ago I was going to preach this, and I thought I better not, because I don't think you were ready for it. I had to preempt it. I had to build up to it with the Playing It Safe message series, because Playing It Safe was really the beginner's course, if you like, the beginner's course of faith. And so now it's time to level up. We're going up another level for the next few weeks. So I'm chatting about the notion of radical, but what I'm really talking about, and you can have a look on the screen, is to live a radical life. I'm talking about living a radical life. And that's what I want to talk about this morning and for the next 3 weeks, living a radical life. And the word radical is really funny to me. Like Steffi, I was prepping this message, and Steph was over my shoulder in the office, and she laughed at the word radical, because it is a bit of a funny word. It reminds me of 2 things. I wonder if it reminds you of the same 2 things. Here are the 2 things that this reminds me of, the word radical, is the Turtles, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, radical, and surfers. They're agreed in the room for it's the Turtles and surfers, or maybe a surfing turtle. And radical dude. And I always loved growing up. I loved surf culture. I just really love surf culture. I love the VW camper stuff. I love everything. You know, we were a beach family. When we used to do holidays as a family, we'd camp and we'd do beach holidays. So I loved everything surf. I love the surf culture, all the stuff that goes around surf culture. In fact, my favourite film as a kid, and this only came back to me actually this week. My favourite film as a kid was Point Break. JP in the room just screamed out, yes. And Point Break, it was my favourite film, probably until early teenagehood, until I realised Keanu Reeves couldn't act. then it wasn't my favourite film anymore. But I love that movie, especially the bit he fires his gun up in the air and goes, "Arr!" It's my favourite bit, when he doesn't want to shoot Patrick Swayze because he loves him a little bit. And but I always loved surf culture, and I love surfing. The only problem is I can't surf. So that's a bit of a difficulty with the whole loving surfing thing, is I can't surf. And I tried for many years doing it, and I've lost a bit of weight now, so I should probably give it another go. Because before, the problem was I'd get up on a board, even on a longboard, at 19 stone, it sort of sank, which is problematic when you're trying to surf. But I love bodyboarding. Bodyboarding, I'm all over that. I smashed that. And me and Steph, some of you know, and you might have watched the Liberty Lockdown episode where we took a 8-hour drive down to Newquay for essentially the day. We stayed overnight one night, and I went bodyboarding, and I can bodyboard like a legend. I am good at bodyboarding. I can even without the flippers on, I'm good at bodyboarding. And it's quite funny, really, because we got down there. I went for a little bodyboard the afternoon we got down there, and then I got up early in the morning. It's like 6 in the morning, something like that. And I got up early to go and bodyboard. And the only people who were in there, and it's Newquay, which is like the surf capital of the UK, the only people that were in there were surfers, not a bodyboarder to be seen, because bodyboarders are like leisurely sort of, so they don't really do it properly. And yet, so it was quite funny, because there was just me with my bodyboard and these hardcore surfers that were out in the break. And they were all wetsuited up, because they're obviously sensible. I had just my shorts on and like buckets of Vaseline on my nipples, literally, because I get sore because I've got sensitive skin. So, and the bodyboard rubs. Most people wear like a rash vest or something like that, but I get too hot. I can't even wear a wetsuit. Even in the sea, I get too hot. And so these guys are all shivering in their wetsuits, and there's me paddling around all these surfer dudes with me on my little bodyboard, and they're just looking at me like, oh, you're a moron. And so I surfed a bodyboard, for a few hours. It was great fun. Tried to stand on the bodyboard. That didn't work either. But bodyboard for a few hours until the lifeguards arrive. And they arrived at like 9 a.m. and they come and they put some flags out. Here's where it's safe to be. And they put some flags out for the surfers and they put flags out for the bodyboarders because they don't like you mixing because I think basically bodyboarders get in the way essentially. And so they come out and they're, excuse me, like you shouldn't be doing this. And I was like played ignorant, oh, sorry, I didn't know. I knew. But radical in surf culture means essentially awesome or impressive surfing. That's what it means, like doing that radically. And it's morphed over the years, I think, in our culture to mean sort of excellent or cool or something like along them lines as well with regard to that. It means lots of things, actually, this word. And the root of the word is actually means the root of words, which is quite funny. And so I'm not talking about either of them today. I'm talking about radical in these terms of affecting the fundamental nature of something or being far-reaching or having complete political or more importantly perhaps social change or being very different from anything that's come before. One might say revolutionary. I'm talking about that sort of radical. And by these definitions, and this is my point today, and it's really quite simple, is Jesus was radical. Jesus was radical. And today I'm going to be really simple, just to ease us into this next level stuff. I'm going to be really simple. All I want us to do is focus on this principle of how radical Jesus was for the week before we start delving into it a little bit more and about us living a radical life. Because when I say Jesus was radical, I mean he was really radical. I mean off the chart radical. I don't mean Keanu Reeves level of radical, long hair and flip-flops and a wetsuit. I'm talking proper level radical. And I would even argue, I'd say that Jesus was the most radical person that ever walked the earth. I want you to think about this, especially if you're a Christ follower, that Jesus was the most radical person that ever walked the earth. And so just to sort of pack that or put some meat on that bones, let's start with even just the miracles that he done. Let's get them out of the way. just the things that he done, the actions that he took, the miracles that he done, changing water into wine. Now, I'm sorry, but that is radical, especially at Christmas time. I know we're only allowed 2 or 3 families. Is it 3 families at Christmas? We're only allowed, so you don't need as much wine, okay? So you don't need to buy as much. But imagine Christmas on a normal Christmas when you've got all the family who run out of wine, and Jesus can turn water into wine. He healed the sick on multiple occasions. That's pretty radical. He fed thousands of people from a small amount of food, a few loaves, a few fish, fed 5,000 people. He walked on water. Now that's pretty radical. And I'm not talking like, whoa. He was smashing it out. He was walking on water, confidently walking on water. He was a dude that could make the blind see. That's pretty radical. Imagine, if I could ever have a gift, sometimes people want to be able to play an instrument or sing. I'd love the ability to make blind people see. That's what I want. How radical would that be? Boosh! And then you've got the raising of Lazarus, his mate, who died, and people come and told him, and he was like, don't worry about it, I'll come in a few days and come and sort him out. Oh, man. And then talk about radical, raising a half-decomposed person back to life. That's radical. And what's even more radical, I think, is him going, I'll come when I'm ready. Jesus was radical. And maybe you're watching at home and you're not a Christian. Maybe it's just a family member that you've come a few times and you're not really sure about this whole God stuff. And and you're not a Christian, you're not even sure, perhaps you didn't even do them things. Maybe your level of faith can't stretch to miracles yet. And I want to say that's cool. It doesn't really matter, but you understand, most people agree, even historians who don't agree who Jesus was, understood that Jesus was real and on the planet, and understood the things that he taught, and the things that he taught were recorded. And so even if you're not a Christian, you can join in with this conversation and this principle. Because I would say, and I actually believe this, what he taught was even more radical than the things he did. And we just looked at some of the things he did. Some of the miracles were so radical, and yet I would say what he taught was even more radical than the things that he did. It seems to me that the miracles he performed, and this is the way I read the Bible, maybe you don't, but it seems to me the miracles he performed were just to say, I'm here from God. That's what it was like. The miracles he was doing is like, I'm from God. And then he said, now I've got your attention. Now listen to what I'm going to tell you. Listen to what I say. Listen to this. What I'm getting at is what Jesus said was radical. Remember, we defined radical as affecting fundamental nature of something or being far-reaching. We're talking about what Jesus talked about and said thousands of years later. Talk about a fundamental change in nature, or a far-reaching, or a complete political or social change. He changed the face of the planet. We said it's very different from anything that had come before. Wow, was Jesus different than anything that had come before? Definitely revolutionary. I said what Jesus taught was radical. The things that he taught for his followers to live out were radical. And I want you to think about this, because we take this a bit for granted, especially if you've been in church for a long time. This dude Jesus, this surfer dude Jesus, rolls up with his long hair and his nicely trimmed beard, and he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father. No one gets to connect with their Creator in heaven except through me. Imagine that. Imagine a bloke Dave round the corner from you coming up to you and say, by the way, I am the way to the Creator of the universe. The only way you can connect with your Creator of the universe and the Creator of you, your Father in heaven who loves you, is through me. You'd be like, all right, Dave. Have you seen your doctor lately, your shrink? It would be a radical thing. It would be complete. People would laugh at you. People would laugh at Dave. Oh, imagine if the Savior of the universe was called Dave instead of Jesus. That would be hilarious. We've got a Dave in the back of the room who's saying, yeah, Dave, you're not Jesus. But imagine that. Imagine him coming into a very religious culture who believed in the Creator of the universe and saying, I am the way to that Father. I am the bridge to that Father. Boom, there's nothing more radical that could have been said. He taught things like, you can commit sin in your heart. This is what Jesus essentially said when you boil it down. You can commit sin in your heart because you're so used to, in this culture, measuring yourself by your actions that other people can measure you by. And Jesus came along and said, I'm more interested in what's going on in there than what you display to other people. And this was a game changer. This was radical in a time where it was all about what you did and what other people can measure you by. Jesus said, I'm not measuring you by that. I'm measuring by what's inside. You've heard it said, do not murder. But I say to you, even if you're angry with someone, you're committing sin. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. Yet I say, if you look at a woman with lust, you're committing sin. This was radical. This was saying it's more important what's going on in your heart than what you display to the world. You boil Jesus' teaching down for me is essentially saying the way you love people is as important as the way you love God. That's when you boil Jesus' teaching down. And this was radical at the time. And maybe it doesn't feel radical to us because we've been in a Christianized Western world for so long that this is sort of the rules that we think we should play by. It's another thing playing by them, though, hey. But essentially that we should love other people. And the way that we love other people is as important as how we love God. And sometimes we disconnect them, and yet it's such a radical idea that almost the way you display your love for God really is through loving people. Jesus said things like, don't make promises or oaths. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. That was quite radical at the time. He said things like, you're blessed or blessed if you're persecuted. Imagine that. Because at the time in these religious folk, it's like if you're doing well and you're at the top of the pile, and then God's obviously blessing you. God's favoring you because you're at the top of the pile. You're the top of the political pile, the religious pile, the power pile, whatever. You're at the top, you're doing well, not being persecuted. That means God's with you. And Jesus showed up and said, if you're persecuted because of my name, you're blessed. It flipped everything on its head. He said, an eye for an eye. You've heard it said, Jesus said, an eye for an eye. That means fairness. Like someone does something to you, you can do exactly the same thing back. And Jesus came with a radical teaching and said, no. And we still struggle with this, I think, in our natural flesh. We like fairness, don't we? If someone does something, we think we're justified to do it back. And yet Jesus said, no, do not return evil with evil, but return it with good. Overcome it with good. This is radical. And I think even still radical today. In fact, he went on to say, love your enemy. But I think that's still as radical today as it was the day he said it. Love your enemy. Even pray for them. Do good for them. The people that wind you up, the people that you can't stand, the people who want to cause you harm all the time. Jesus said, love them. Jesus said, pray for them. Do good to them. There's not much more radical you can do than that. Jesus said, if you want to be great in my eyes, in God's eyes, then I want you to be a servant. Talk about a radical principle, because Jesus turned up into a culture where people didn't want to be servants. Slaves were because they were bottom of the rung and God wasn't favoring them. And yet he turned up and said, you want to be really important? Make yourself a servant. Make yourself a slave. This was a radical concept. I think he'd argue to stop striving for political power, for social power, for financial power, for religious power. And Jesus put it this way. He said, seek first the kingdom, and I'll sort all the other stuff out. I'll provide everything else that you need, but seek first the kingdom of God. This was a radical thing. He even said, and this is completely countercultural in our time, if you want to be raised up, lower yourself. You see, like even in our social media world now, people raise themselves up. They put finance into boosting themselves, their posts, so they can be seen across the world and be successful. And yet Jesus came with this thing and said, if you really want to be lifted up, then actually take yourself down a few pegs. Those who take themselves down a few pegs will actually be lifted up. He taught things like, if you want to be important, or if you think you're important, wash other people's feet. What a radical, imagine that. Imagine a CEO of your company coming around and washing the cleaner's feet. You guys at home can't see, but Tony's nearly thrown up in the corner. He's got a thing about feet. But how radical, imagine that. Imagine the most important person in the company that you work at comes and does something and humbles themselves. So Jesus said, if you want to be important, then take them roles. And when you read the stories of Jesus, Jesus placed value on women and on children that no one else did in their culture. He come along and gave time to women, gave time to children, talked to them in a way that other people wouldn't have done. He was radical. And I could go on and on and on, but I'm supposed to be doing this quite quickly. And so, so perhaps the most important thing, or the most radical thing that he done and taught, was that he came with this concept and this teaching of grace, the gift of grace. Unmerited favor, the salvation of your soul. I want you to think about this, because it just doesn't make any sense. The salvation of your soul, not by your own works, not by you being good, but just entrusting in him, not working your way to heaven. And this was a weird concept to people who, particularly for the Pharisees, who he pushed back against a lot because he thought they were hypocrites, and they were in many regards. But he pushed back against them because do you know what a Pharisee's job was essentially? They're like the lawyers of the time, but essentially they were paid to be good. It was like they were there to be as good as possible, to earn their way to heaven, essentially. That might be an oversimplification of it. But he brought this principle of grace, of not working your way to heaven. You don't earn it. It's a free gift just by trusting in him. Like he said, he was the way, the truth, and the life. So I repeat, and I repeat, Your Honor, that Jesus was radical. Jesus was radical. And Jesus was so radical, even in deep water, when he was surrounded by sharks, because in that time, saying the things he said, he had sharks all around him looking to nab at him and bite chunks out of him and take him down at every opportunity. Even when he was in deep water, surrounded by sharks, just like them surfers do. I don't understand these people. The surfers who go out when there are great whites in the water and carry on surfing. It just makes no sense to me. That's radical. That's proper radical, that is. But Jesus was just like that. It's the same picture. The things he was teaching in the culture that he was in, it was like going surfing with sharks. He was radical, and he didn't bail out like you do on a wave. He didn't bail out when it was too big. He didn't get wiped out on the journey, but he rode that wave all the way to his death and resurrection. And in doing so, punctuated his teaching. That's what he done. Through his death and resurrection, he predicted his own death and resurrection and pulled it off. And in doing so, punctuated everything he taught, every message that he think, every word that he spoke, he punctuated and said, see, this is the way I want you to live. This is how I want you to treat people. This is how I want you to do life and interact with your Father in heaven. This is radical, and hundreds of people witnessed it and went on to become radical followers of Jesus. Some of the things they did were just off the chart. And through radical radical love, he made a radical sacrifice. A love so radical that when you were lost, he came and found you, just like that song, Reckless Love, that I'm sure we'll do next week. He left the 99 to find the one. That was radical. So I want to finish by saying, Jesus was radical. But are you? I want you to think about that. Jesus was radical. But are you? We're going to pick that up next week as we carry on this series, Radical.
That's it for this week. We hope to see you next week here or online. We hope you have a fantastic week.